Hey everybody, how you doing? Hey, so if you're watching, you're either interested in what I have to say about Conclave and have never seen it, or you've seen it and are interested in what I have to say, or you just simply want to weigh in on the fact that I'm tracking about, or will eventually wind up talking about the trans community and current politics. Whatever the case, I get it. Okay, I get it. By the way, if you don't know, I'm Abraham, CEO of Zenny62 Media and creator of what is now called the Vlog Report with Zenny62. At any rate, I saw Comcast Conclave, because it does appear on Comcast and Peacock, right? 2 days ago. And I watched it with my mom here, and I was just blown away. Absolutely blown away. Because I love movies that are focused on political intrigue, that are intricate, and that are lovely to watch. Conclave was all of those. Conclave is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen in my life. The scenes are like paintings, and there are a number of scenes where you focus on one character with a solid color black background, and you can make out the details of that person's face and their expression at the time, be it joy or anguish or just plain um, reflection. It's quite an edible movie, something that you just want to take in and eat up and then watch again and again and again, because there's so much there. It reminds me in that vein of The Godfather by Francis Ford Coppola, both Godfather 1 and 2. In those movies, I've seen Godfather 42 times and counting, because every time I watch The Godfather, I always see some detail I missed before. And I'm certain that will be the case with Conclave. Conclave, first of all, I didn't know about the intricacies of what it takes to go into the selection of the Pope and why the white smoke comes up. I read it before, but it's not something that has been my primary focus. I think more because I'm American as opposed to living in Italy. Although I've always, like you or anybody else, been interested in who the Pope was and was named, and then of course we watch it and it drops off until of course Christmas, and then we get the Vatican and midnight mass, which I love. Okay, and no, I'm not a Catholic, but Conclave takes you and it literally dips you into this simulated world of, well, the Vatican during Conclave, a multi-day week event, really, where you see this brutal kind of quasi blood sport of people who so want to be the Pope that they will do what happens in some companies in the United States, America, and when it's ascending, they take out your knees by putting out stories about you that are salacious, although true. So someone checks that out and it's like, oh my God, I didn't know this. And that happens with the what looks like is going to be the first black pope. And unfortunately, the cardinal had a child by a nurse many, well, decades ago in Nigeria, and apparently didn't quite clean up the relationship, didn't marry her, that sort of thing. He was a priest. It was something that he, know, didn't intend to do per se, but he did it, right? He did it, okay? He did it. And, well, he went from being ahead by, he was up by as much as 34 votes. And he went from 34 votes, dropped all the way down 9 votes. Yeah, yeah, 9 votes. So basically, he lost 25 votes, like that, and was basically out of the running. And then, of course, the count went through and looked for a time like Ray Fiennes' character, Lawrence. Cardinal Lawrence was going to be the Pope. That didn't happen. But what did happen was there was a gentleman who made a statement. See, at the time, Conclave, it's really also a story subversively about race and racism, because uh, Traven, one of the Cardinals. The Cardinals actually rose to second, and at one point he was head for a moment as a guy who he was called in the description an Italian traditionalist, which is a cool word of saying, yeah, the guy's racist. He didn't like the idea of there being black cardinals or French cardinals, and said so. Well, so in he caused his outrage and his open yelling about it caused such a stir that another cardinal, very quiet in the back, spoke. And this cardinal actually was from Argentina, and but he so mesmerized the other cardinals that his name was thrown into the hat, if you will, to be pope, and he won. He won. He won. And when they asked him what he wanted to be called, instead of Cardinal or Pope John Paul, he said innocent. That was what he said, innocent. So it looked like Innocent was on his way to being Pope. Of course, in the middle of all this, someone decided they were going to end their lives in a fashion that's very ugly during it. And that didn't really change a thing. Innocent became the new Pope. But what happened was that Ray Fiennes' character, Cardinal Lawrence, didn't want to accept that the previous Pope had all of these papers, and he kept and that the Pope, the Cardinal that was played by John Lithgow, had all of these secrets. He had used one of those secrets to take down the gentleman from Nigeria who would have been the first black Pope. And so Ray Fiennes' character broke into, no other way to put it, the previous Pope who had passed on lair, and found all these documents, and among them discovered that the man they just elected the Pope was actually a woman. That's right, a woman. And this gets into matters that you really have to stop and say, okay, where's your head as an individual? Because what happened to him was that he was born that way. He was really born looking like a boy, but his other parts down there were those of a woman. And he's played by Mr. Deitch. And so, among the cast members, uh, his name is actually Carlos Dietz. But what happened was that he said that he was going an operation to take out the female side of him, if you will. But he decided not to do it for simple reason that he said, look, this is who I am. And I've been this way. I was made this way by the Lord. And this is the way I'm going to stay. And they didn't raise a stink. He wasn't removed. He became the Pope. Now you may be wondering, is this a true story? The answer is no, it's not a true story. It's based on a novel by Robert Harris. And so its rise does give a question to what it was really, what Conclave is really trying to do. You and I both know that the plight of the trans community has been in our face now, uh, in large part for the last 5 to 6 years. And it was intensified because President Trump decided to make it an issue, and the Republican Party decided to make it an issue, as you know, watching this. But the real problem here, as I see it, is that the issue of being trans is not one that a significant part of the population anywhere in the world faces. It's, I mean, if it were so great, we would have had an actual situation like that with an actual pope, okay? Simply because of the fact that by number, the odds of that occurring would have been much greater, but they're not. We like to, in this society, focus on the extremes, and we take these extremes and we make them mainstream. We take extremes and we make them and say, hey, look, do you like this? This is the way your society is going. But Conclave presents a fact that's hard to denounce, that we've been this way all the time. We just never wanted to acknowledge it, which means that somewhere in the past, or maybe in Robert Harris's research, there was a pope that had a problem similar to that, but maybe never even came to the rise of cardinal, which would not make it a true story if it were borrowed. Now, people can't help who they are. I have interviewed a number of people who identified themselves as trans over the decades. No issue. They're great people. Ricky Kozlowski has been a great Alameda County, California judge for decades now. And I can go on and on and on. The bottom line is how what they are faced with doing hits you is a function of, and I'm not going to criticize anybody who has a problem with it, how you grew up and your own background. It is a hard something to deal with. Okay? It is. Because you ask, and particularly for those who turn around and make the change, hey, why can't you decide to remain who you are? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was trying to bring the Super Bowl to Oakland, I needed seats and hotel rooms. I had the seats, but I needed a hotel room is what I meant to say. Because the NFL had a rule that you had to have 27,500 hotel rooms, 24,000 hotel rooms, 24,500 hotel rooms within an hour's drive of the stadium. Now, the Bay Area, that on its face seems like a cinch, and then you try to put them together because you're on a contract, it becomes a different story. It becomes hard. San Mateo County had 15,000 hotel rooms, top quality. So I contacted the executive director then, this was 1999, named Mark Chapdelaine. And I arranged to meet with Mr. Chapdelaine. And so I drove down to the offices of the San Mateo Convention and Visitors Bureau and waited to meet Mr. Mark Chapdelaine after talking with him on the phone. So I wait, and I noticed there was a very big shadow that was coming from the other side of this translucent glass-like material. So big that it blotted out the sun that was illuminating my face and warming the area that I was sitting in, not that it was so cold. Well, that person came out from that divider, and it was Mark Chapdelaine, except that Mark Chapdelaine was a woman. That's right. Mark Chapdelaine had just changed his sex from male to female and became Marcia Chapdelaine. Yeah. And so that was my first encounter with anybody in my life. I interviewed Vicky later, it'll be 2008, when she was running for a seat. Now, she was at the Democratic Party election for the district seats, council seats. And so by then it was like, whatever. But that was my first encounter with anyone who had that. That wasn't the focus of our conversation in its entirety. But I did ask, and he talked about it in brief. And I listened. And listened some more, and listened some more, and listened some more. I didn't ask any questions. Then we got to the matter of the Super Bowl and seats, and it turned out to be a long, good meeting. And I came away That's, I keep saying seats, but I mean my rooms, my rooms. And I came away with my rooms and an agreement to do a second meeting where he was going to actually show me the operation. And so I did. I watched because this is someone who had to get out of his system what he had done to himself. And I guess his best way was to do it, was to share it. And I I understood that. Now, was I being transactional? I'm not going to lie. I was. Now, but would I have not watched or said anything if I didn't have to gain hotel rooms? The answer is, if I were in the room and the subject came up and this is a person who needed to talk about that, I'd listen because I think that's the right thing to do. That's the way that I am. Okay. Now, my reactions would have been slightly different, but I don't, by my nature, like to upset people unless I feel those persons have done something wrong to another person of a physical or verbal nature. No. Um, but Mark did lose his job. He didn't lose his job for the change. That wasn't the board's issue. The board's issue was that he forced his employees to watch the same video. And that was crossing the line. That was crossing the line. I don't know what happened to Marcia. I read something about them, I think, taking a tour around the world or something. I hope she's well. Um, but it's something to it is difficult to understand what would drive a person to want to alter themselves that way, with the idea that life is going to be better, as opposed to, frankly, a belief in the Lord and being thankful for the life you were given. And that's where Conclave comes into play. Because the difference between the fictional character in Conclave and Miss Chapdelaine is that Miss Chapdelaine, Marcia, was Mark. And by all accounts, there wasn't anything that Mark was born with, okay, that was unusual. This is a decision that he made to become a she because he believed emotionally he was geared better that way. Now, that sends an insult to those who are men who are emotionally empathic. We care. We have no problem crying when it's required, sometimes when it's not. So what? A man is a man who admits his shortcomings, his strengths, and goes from there. That's it. But somewhere along the line, he didn't get that message. But we can't fault him for that. However, where Marcia went wrong was in the idea that others needed to be forced to accept what he had done to the point of watching the operation. That is wrong. Because, look, you don't do something like that to your kids, well, for obvious reasons. You don't do that to other people because of their sensibilities. So you have to respect them because of social norms. We're designed as men and women to want to reproduce. And indeed, not reproducing, if you think about it, will only cause us as a species to die. And no one wants that. No one wants. I hope no one wants that. But that's a fact. So Conclave was a shock of a story, a heck of a story, and a story you have to watch, if only to ask yourself, what do you think about it? Is it a good movie? I think it's a doggone good movie. It wouldn't surprise me if it landed Best Picture. Okay. Will it? Is another story. Why? Whether it's like 10, can't, 10 movies that are up for the prize. Um, and so I'm leaving. I'm reading your comments now. David says I thought he was born intersex. Love the movie. Fabio says you're wrong. The character is intersex. There's a difference. Okay, fine. I accept that. But in, intersex. I thought about this for a long time. Intersex is one thing, but you have to remember when you make a decision to remove your parts. Okay, all right. The normal public is going to read that as trans. In other words, that you went to get altered. Understand? Okay. So from that perspective, it is apropos to use the term trans, if only to understand what the term intersex means. And I'm glad you brought that up because I really thought a long time about how I would refer to this out of respect for the subject matter and others. And what I constantly came back to is the fact that Cardinal said, well, it was discovered that he was on his way for realignment surgery, for adjustment surgery. Okay? So again, the minute you go to have yourself fixed in that way, you come into another area. And I'm talking about how the public is going to view it. You can say what the actual term is all you want to. What matters from a political standpoint is how the public is going to read it. And the public is going to read it as trans. That's a fact. Okay? Because we're not using the term intersex in a common way. Not only that, the term hasn't even worked its way into our culture to where it could be explained in the context or the conversations regarding we're trans. I'm not saying it hasn't made it there, but it's not as common as the term that we hear. It simply isn't. So I think this conversation will go a long way toward changing that by some microscopic, force. But the simple fact of the matter is, the difference for me would have been if there were no change. That, in other words, he didn't try to get himself fixed. Okay, he didn't try to get himself fixed, and yet he did. All right. Had he not tried, there would have been no medical record of the attempt, no attempt to try to get money to go to get this done. And for those of you who say, well, he actually never got it done, so therefore there was no medical record. Well, no, there was a record of him trying to do it. So that is a medical record. Okay? That's it. So, Fabio, uh, I thank you for the comment. And that's why I did this to really put it out there because I think this is something that's supposed to be talked about, and it's hidden in the shadows. It's too bad that you said bye, like I'm not going to stick around. All right, because why did you respond? You know, what was the reason? Right. So you can't be afraid to talk about things. You can't decide, okay, I'm going to judge this person because they didn't use this term or that term, as opposed to saying, okay, they use this term and I don't like it. Here's why. And I'm explaining to you why I use the term. However, you're not explaining to me why it was so important for you to hang on to the term intersex as opposed to deal with the fact that this person was really trying to change themselves. themselves from what they were to something else, or to something that they believe is normal. They thought about it and they didn't do it. Okay? I mean, it's something that should be talked about, should be argued about. And I love the movie too. And I say, see it, I'm going to see it again. Because it is a dang good movie. It is a dang good movie. That's why. All right? That's why. And it is a trans story, like it or not. It really is. Even if to say, well, okay, this person's intersex, but then but then Zinni's saying that they were actually going to get adjusted and all this. Fine. All right. Hey, thanks for listening, folks. That ends the stream. Subscribe to Zinni62.